From Escape Collective, this is Overnight Success, the podcast about the entrepreneurs, the personalities, and the passionate people who make up the sport of cycling and the stories behind the icons they've built. This time, we speak with Graham Watson, the most prolific cycling photographer in, perhaps, the world. Like other pioneers of their professions, some might argue that it was easier back in the day and there were more opportunities back then. But everything is obvious in hindsight, and as you'll soon hear from Graham, it was anything but easy. I'm a big believer that you make your own luck to open the next door, and that's precisely what Graham did over the 5 decades he covered the sport. And whoever came up with the saying, nice guys finish last, well, they certainly haven't met Graham.
I left school at the age of 16. I was one of those guys that sat at the back of the classroom and never listened to what the teacher was telling us to do. And I managed to get a job in photography the day after my school term ended at the age of 16. Left school on the Friday. Monday morning I was working as an apprentice photographer in the centre of London in a studio. And
did you know anything about photography?
Not much at all. There was a PE teacher at school who, although he had to teach rugby, football and cricket, he actually was a keen cyclist. And he also ran a photography club at lunchtime. And
Right.
So, although I didn't join the photography club, nor did I ride a bike at the time, for some reason, he became a kind of an excuse to not take up British sports, typical British sports, and ended up being a very keen cyclist and eventually a professional photographer. And so I started my life as an apprentice photographer in July of 1972. And I lived about 20 kilometres south of London, and I couldn't afford the train fare to go into work every day. And so my mother bought me a bicycle, and I started riding the 20 kilometres each way, got very fit, met other cyclists, as you do, going past traffic lights or waiting at traffic lights.
Yeah.
I ended up joining a club, and then I wanted to be Eddie Merckx straight away.
Right. And Eddie Merckx was like prolific at that time
in the early 70s, I think he'd probably won like 2 or 3 Tours de France. And, like anyone else, you want to be the next Eddie Merckx because it's all glamour and glory. And also I remember back in the day, probably like about 5 years earlier, I'd seen on the BBC News, Tom Simpson literally dying on the Ventoux. And again, I wasn't so taken by football or cricket or rugby. And I thought, well, this is incredible. Drama, the tragedy of it all. It's like you would never see on a football field or, watching some very dull game of cricket.
Yeah.
And that 5 years later, here I was riding a bicycle into and out of London. Sometimes late at night, we'd work late. And eventually, when that company closed down after 5 years, I went to see the Tour de France in 1977.
Just as a spectator?
As a spectator with a camera, because by then I was I wasn't accomplished, but I was actually an established photographer. I had kind of passed any exams there were to pass. I'd got there, and I thought, well, I'll go and see the Tour de France, and it was Eddie Merckx's last tour. That may have been the catalyst to what drew me over there. And I was already a club cyclist. Not a very good one. I knew quite soon I knew how good or bad I was because dreams only last for so long.
Did you have aspirations in your own cycling, or was it just a hobby?
I think I had aspirations. I was still only about 22, so I had aspirations definitely. And I even took time out after 1977 to actually just ride for about 2 years without any pretensions to work again while I could. And in theory being, if you ride your bike every day, year round, you'll become as good as Eddie Merckx. Well, it's not quite true. But eventually, after a couple of years, I realised I wasn't going to be the next Eddie Merckx, nor was I going to be a national champion, nor a regional champion, not even a club champion. And by that time, I'd seen the tour and I'd taken a camera, and it's easy to say now, but it just all rolled into one, beautiful way of life.
And you're the same age as Sean Kelly, is that right, or about?
The same age as Sean Kelly.
Did
within.
you ever cross paths with him in, in the club scene or anything like that,
No,
or
no, no,
no?
no.
No, no, okay. So
I'm not,
you went to the tour, you saw Eddie Merckx on this is '77, is
yeah,
that what you
yeah,
said?
yeah.
Um, how were you photographing? Was it just a stage or was it the whole race?
No, it was actually the last weekend of the tour. So they came into Paris and did a stage in Versailles on the Saturday. And then they did 2 stages on the Sunday morning in Paris, a morning time trial and an afternoon circuit race in the rain,
Right.
which was very fortuitous because it meant everybody on the Champs-Élysées on those slippery cobbles was basically riding, 3 meters behind everybody else. I was able to pick out Eddie Merckx straight away because he was at the front and always having an attack or an acceleration. But because it was wet, he was from the very first moment he was already by himself on the Champs Elysees. So,
Yeah, right.
and I was standing behind the barriers, and I had like a 180 mil telephoto lens on my camera.
Yeah,
It was a wind on camera, no motor drive, nothing.
yeah.
But he was a clear shot. You could see him coming from miles away. And got the picture, and eventually entered a competition in a magazine called Cycling. It's now called Cycling Weekly. It was called Cycling back then,
Yeah.
and I didn't win it, but I got a highly commended prize, and that was literally the door to my new way of life. It was I earned about £25, or if you like, $50, for the picture that got published.
What
And
would that be in today's would that be like 500 or
no,
a couple
no,
hundred?
I can tell you no. I mean, it was £25 back then, and I would imagine with the rate of exchange as it was back then, it was probably about $30. I mean,
Yeah, right.
literally, not much at all.
But you felt pretty good about getting the prize.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
because I was already a professional photographer who earned money from doing what I do well. It was a way of dragging me along and saying, "Well, it's justified. The trip to Paris was justified. It cost you £200 and you got £25 back.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't look back, look forward. Just do it again, do it again."
Do you still have that photo?
Yeah, still have it. Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. It's
What a significant moment that represents, eh?
yeah. I mean, it's not a technically it's nothing special, but it's a picture of Merckx. If it had been a picture of even Bernard Thévenet, who won that year's Tour de France, it wouldn't be the same. It was Eddie Merckx,
Mm.
and it was the most perfect way of getting involved, getting into the business.
And tell me, how did that get you into the business? What doors did it open? What was the progression from there?
Well, by the time I got to 1977, I was actually out of work by a few days, and I decided I didn't want to go into another studio situation where I've been working for 5 years. I had the opportunity. A rival company said, "Would you like to come work for us?" And I said, "No, no, no." And the company I was working for was closing down. And so I thought, well, no, I can do better than this. Being in a studio is nice, but I want to see the sun. I want to be outside. And I went to Paris to see the tour finish, and suddenly, 3 or 4 worlds came together. One was outdoor life. 2 was cycling. 3 was adventure. 4 was you know s- getting a taste, getting the perfume of a foreign culture. And in the space of a few hours on a Champs Elysees on a Sunday afternoon in July 1977, I suddenly dreamed up this kind of a way of life that might be out there if I applied myself. And so I did. I went back the year after. I went back in 1978. Did a whole week of the tour in a car, and then I went to like Paris Roubaix and Tour of Flanders. And every year, whenever I earned a bit of money from my photography, I'd put it back into the traveling for the next race.
In those early days, like their first tour after in '78, for example, Paris-Roubaix, did you have accreditation? Were you just on the roadside like a fan taking photos?
Just on the roadside, I was on the roadside that day in Paris in 1977, and I was on the roadsides for all the following tours of France until 1980, when
Yeah, right.
I managed to. But by which time in 1980, I'd become quite well accepted at Cycling Magazine, and eventually the editor was persuaded to apply for my credentials for the 1980 Tour de France, and then I was inside the barriers.
And you would go to the tours and big races, and you'd be able to sell your photos to the magazines at this point, and
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of not well documented, but it was that. If you think of 1977, you start to think of beyond Eddie Merckx, you start to think of Sean Kelly. You start to think of a guy called Phil Anderson.
Mm.
They all flooded into the sport at that time, along with quite a few other guys from the Northern Hemisphere. And literally, magazines opened up. They began business because of these cyclists that were suddenly competing in Europe, as well as sometimes beating the Europeans. And I was the photographer who was there, and I was just there at the right time. They came to me for pictures, and they got the pictures, and it was like a snowball that kept turning and just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
And were you able to live solely off your photography cycling photography at the time, or did you have to do other things to hustle your way through?
No, it was all I did because I was still living with my mother. I'd never left home. I could have. I'm not a material person, but I realised the moment I start renting a house or accommodation somewhere, that's the end of my business. So I stayed at home
Yeah,
way
wow.
into my early 30s because it enabled me to go off and travel and do everything I wanted to do and without any pressure, and just come home whenever I wanted to come home, and I didn't pay any rent either. So in the formative years, which are very important in any business, I had very little costs other than the actual cost of travel.
Mm.
It's and buying new equipment and just building the business.
Yeah, yeah. And did you really, you said you applied yourself. Did you really think of this as a business and this is what I'm going to do and this is kind of my dream coming true, or were you just kind of going along as it came?
Well, both really. I mean, I think because I'd done 5 years as a professional photographer in London and learned some of the technique and how to deal with people, how to get the best pictures out of people you're
Mm.
talking to. So I was already attuned to being a professional photographer. So there was no question of going to the Tour de France and not doing something constructive out of it, not getting something out of it. I was always looking to start the business, to build the business. And the way I did it was there was a dream as well. But what I was trying to do was to go to as many races as I could, realizing that your Sean Kellys of the world, your Phil Andersons, who came along in, I think, 1981, they were my paymasters. They were gonna win races, and I was going to be selling my pictures because of them.
Yeah, yeah.
So the more races I went to, um, the more pictures I had to sell.
Yeah, right.
But bearing in mind we didn't have internet, and the more pictures I sold, I could literally post them, develop the prints, post them to Sydney or wherever, and it was just part of a business that grew and grew and grew. But the basic plan was to go to as many races as I could afford to, pick out the best races,
Yeah.
and that's it sounds very simple. It wasn't, but
No, I don't
but
imagine.
there was a dream, yes, but determination to make a business out of it.
Were there photographers you looked up to, and that they had done what you were trying to do, or were they just random people showing up and there wasn't any one person that you aspired to be like?
Yeah, well, there's three ways. First of all, back in the day, you couldn't get a picture published in Europe if you didn't have a press card. It was like a very what they used to call unions, where you freelancers weren't allowed anywhere near the scene, except if you had to be English and therefore kind of a real foreigner, not someone living in Europe. And I came along and kind of broke up the monopoly of the agencies at the time. And I didn't really look up to anybody in particular, but I think like most kids that at that time used to buy the French magazine called Miroir du Cyclisme. Used to buy if you could get hold of it. There was a Belgian magazine, a Flemish Belgian magazine called Sport 70, which is a weekly, glorious, colourful weekly magazine. And these two photographers, one was a guy called Aldo Tomois, who's Belgian, and another guy is Henri Besson. And these are the two photographers through those magazines I used to get, who I looked up to. They're the ones I wanted to emulate. And then more recently, probably in the mid-'80s, I started to see a lot of work from a Dutch photographer called Cor Vos. Yes, Cor Vos. And he worked for a Dutch magazine called Wheeler Review. In other words, Review of Cycling, which was also, I believe, a weekly magazine because Dutch cycling has suddenly taken off. And so I got to know Cor's work, and his was probably the one I looked up to technically as being perfect. Whereas Henri Besson he was French, so he had a lot of flair. And and some of his stuff wasn't very good technically, but he captured the moment. He had such a feeling for his job. And then the other guy, Eldor Tomoir, was just one guy who was always in the right place at the right time. So like a news photographer. And they're the three guys I've always modeled myself on, really. And I try to emulate each one in terms of the qualities that they had, that they possessed. And then eventually, I'm sure at some stage, I then moved on and created my own style and challenges to maintain.
I think one thing that might not be obvious now in the world we live in, but the cycling that you came to was Europeans, right? There wouldn't have been much English even spoken. There wouldn't have been English riders back in the late 70s, early 80s. And I imagine there was a hierarchy of, photography professionals there. And did you find that hard to break into with, being one of the only English speaking people there? Like I imagine there weren't many journalists English speaking either. Were there? Like, how was that? And how was living in that sphere?
I think with the benefit of hindsight, I treated it as a challenge to be overcome because
Okay.
there was an awful lot of chauvinism around, especially in France. But many people, many organisers, many magazines, many photographers they went out of their way to help me. I mean,
Really?
very few people stood in my way because I think they suddenly realised the world was changing. That Sean Kelly was winning races, Phil Anderson wore the yellow jersey, Stephen Roach came along in those days, and many, many others. And I think they actually saw me as an asset to the sport in that,
Yeah, right.
let's get this guy access. He's English. We have no exposure of our races in the English language market around the world. And so,
Yeah, wow.
and they actually, I wouldn't say they went out of their way to help me, but only one or two people, literally stood in my way and didn't last for long.
It wasn't cutthroat at all. It was very inclusive.
Not cutthroat, no, because it wasn't in the digital age. Each photographer had an outlet for his photography, and
Right.
and it was his outlet. It wasn't a question of someone competing because all you could do was take a picture and either post a roll of film to somebody to develop, or somehow get a print done and post the print. There was
Yeah.
no unless you were an agency who had some very specialized transmission equipment. There was no way of syndicating an image around the world to compete with other photographers syndicating their images. It was your picture was going to go to your magazine in Australia, in London, or in New York or Los Angeles. So
Yeah.
you weren't really competing with anybody. If anything, you were competing with yourself and your ability, your freedom, and your finances to travel to as many races as you could get to, because there was nobody able to stand in your way. If you were good enough to take a good picture, there was no barriers to selling it. There was no magazine editor that could look at your picture and look at Paul Voss's and say, "Oh, Coors is better. No, Graham's is better." There was nothing like that. You literally you had a guy in Sydney waiting for your picture of Phil Anderson, and he would wait until he got it, and then they print their magazine. And it was the same in London. It was a very strange thing to look at now, but at the time, I wasn't like running into people who were deliberately trying to compete with me. They had their own markets to aim at. They had their it was very structured in those days. If you were from Belgium, you were employed by a newspaper publisher or a magazine editor. There were no websites anywhere, and that was your market. Your market was that Belgian newspaper or that Belgian magazine. You didn't send your pictures to an English magazine or to a Dutch magazine or to you had that market. So what I was doing was building my own market within this much bigger world of European photographers.
Right.
And I became one of them in that way, and more. I was more a friend than a rival.
Yeah, wow. Tell me what the scene was like back then. Like, how many photographers did you have to contend with? The ones who were credited.
Um, well, I suppose when I first started, there was probably 25 photographers on the Tour de France,
Okay,
and
it's quite a lot.
23 of those were French, Dutch, or Belgian, or Italian. I think at the time the mid '80s came along, there was a growing quantity of English speaking photographers, and Germans were coming in because there's some good cyclists. Basically, wherever a group of cyclists comes into the sport, photographers follow because it's not much, but they don't smell the money, but they smell the chance of success, the chance of living off a cyclist's talent and success as you come along.
Yeah.
That's how it grows. That's why you see, many years on, you see how the Tour de France's group of spectators change. It goes from being, the American fans of Lance Armstrong to the Sky fans of Chris Froome and things like that. It's
In Colombia right now.
in
Yeah.
Colombia. You'll see that. Well, you won't see it this year, but
Yeah.
that's how it grows. It's so if you can imagine a Frenchman playing cricket in the English cricket league, whatever they call it, you'd have French photographers suddenly running over to
Yeah.
pictures. That's how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Rupert came along. Rupert was the first ever, not the first ever. He was the first kind of person I knew that really went out as a freelance and settled himself in Europe. And once he moved on from Winning Magazine in the late 80s, he set himself up as a freelance journalist, typed away all day long, all night long, and wrote stories for 3 or 4 publications, and loved it. And he created a scenario where today there's probably 25 or 30 English language journalists based around Europe and various parts of the world writing away.
Yeah.
He may not know it, and they may not know it, but he was like the catalyst of what you see today.
Is that right?
So yeah, and then I was there going along for the ride as well. It was good fun. It was very good times.
I think one thing that also isn't obvious is, you can see riders jostling for position at critical areas of the stages and that, but there's also jostling in with the photographers on the motorbikes. And, you guys, not that you're rubbing elbows or anything, but there's a hierarchy. There's the best position to be in, and before you get called off the Poggio, for example, where somebody's going to attack. Was that a challenge or a fight for you to get in the hierarchy to get the best photos, or how did that all work? And take me through that dynamic.
Well, first of all, I had to get myself established in the races on a motorbike, which is not easy. But
how did you do that? How did you do that?
I used my my Englishness, if you like. I approached the organisers of. I couldn't get into the French races, I couldn't get anywhere near the Paris-Roubaix or Tour de France on a motorbike. But I went to see some people in Belgium who organised the Tour of Flanders, and the guys in Italy organised the Tour of Lombardy and Milan-San Remo. And I showed them examples of what I had published in magazines like Velo News or Cycling Weekly and Bicycling Australia years ago. And of course, they suddenly thought, man, this guy's getting all our races published in these countries outside of Europe. So instantly, I had a place in those races, like mid 80s. Probably, I think 89, 83, I was doing the like Tour of Flanders, Liège, Bastogne, Liège, and Tour of Lombardy, Milan, San Remo. And like everything else, it just grew and grew and grew. And then after a few more years, once the other photographers were seeing the magazines I worked for, and then they take you seriously. They show not just friendship, but they show respect.
Yeah.
And suddenly, when you're on the Poggio and there's 10 photographers' motorbikes trying to get that picture when Sean Kelly attacks or something, they don't give way to you, but they're a little bit they're respectful of what I was doing, so they gave you a chance.
Okay.
And then if you happen to have a very good motorbike driver, that little chance becomes a very big chance because he'll get you in the best position. So you're not really physically pushing your way in, but yes, in some ways you are. It was all part of a strategy you had to employ at each race to be there when the big attack happened. And there's one of the things that actually motivated me probably between the mid 80s when I had really got myself accepted until the late 90s, where it was a free for all. It was a Wild West show. There were no officials in the races to stop you. Having these little battles with other photographers to get in the right place at the right time. And I loved it. It was fantastic. And if you did the Tour of Flanders on, let's say, 1988, and you missed the picture of Bill Anderson attacking with Eddie Planckaert, a year later you remembered it, and the year later I got it right.
Yeah,
there was that kind of motivation in all the races that you make a mistake, you haven't got a picture of the winning attack or whatever. And a year later, however, you've looked at your notes and you think, right, this year I'm going to do it differently. And it was very much part of the fun of photographing cycle races.
It's interesting because that's what a pro cyclist or a pro athlete would do as well, right? Like they would understand their mistakes from last year and want to improve on that. And you're really in there sweating with them as well too, right? Like you're not part of the competition, but you're really part of the race, aren't you?
Yeah, because you're aware as a professional, you've said, well, I'm paying X amount of money to go to this race, paying X amount of money for the motorbike driver, for my hotel, for his food, for your food. And you've got to get results.
Yeah.
And not just for your pride, but to justify the expense of the trip, and also to keep your contract, your relationship with your chosen publications, your magazines and newspapers. So it's highly competitive. In the more recent years, they race organisers had to sign a guy on a motorbike. They called it a regulator, and he was actually specifically there to make sure you paid properly. And then they began a system whereby you don't really see it on TV, but if there's 16 motorbikes in the Tour de France, you can only work one by one. There's like a head of the peloton, outside of the TV cameras. There's all the motorbikes are up there, and there's a regulator that says, right, you go back and take a picture. And it's purely luck if you happen to go back to take a picture when someone's attacked them to make the winning move. So the fun went out of it a little bit, although you did devise other little tricks and try and get the best pictures. But it's sort of somewhere between the mid 80s and late 90s was absolutely fantastic.
Take me through a day, say mid 80s in that period. Take me through a day of the Tour de France and how you would operate then before the world was digital.
Okay, well, you'd always look at the road book before you start. That was obligatory the night before as well as the morning of the race, and you'd make a plan for the day. You would look at if it's scenery or if it's an action shot. Every day was different, and also as the years went by, I would know roughly where I was in France. I'd think, we're within the Loire Valley. I better make sure we're not going past that chateau. And sure enough, we'd go past the chateaus. So you'd make a note of that in the race manual. Stop there, and every day would be a plan whereby you either went for the scenery shot early on, and then waiting for the race to evolve, and it becomes more of an action orientated day. But basically, you'd set off with a bunch of films in your pocket, waiting to be used, and you'd ready to roll a film through the camera and fire away, and then you put the used films in your left pocket. And you get through like 10, 12 rolls of film a day.
When you say a roll, do you mean 12 photos, 36 photos?
36.
36, okay. 36. Yeah.
And so in the beginning of the day, your right pocket would be full of film to be used. And by the end of the day, your left pocket would be filled with film that had been used. And you'd get to the finish, and guy would cross the line, and you take a picture, and you wait for the podium and take a picture. And then you look at each other and say, well, let's go to the pub.
Oh, you didn't have to develop anything?
No. Well, there was back in the early 80s, mid 80s, there was nowhere to develop color slide film.
Right. Okay.
Or you could go to a big city and look for a laboratory, but that took days.
Yeah.
But basically,
and you didn't need it an hour after or that moment.
No. You'd go to the press room and maybe have a chat with the journalist you're working with, who also wouldn't be on much of a deadline. And then you go off and you go to your hotel, and you'd be having dinner at 7:30 in the evening, and in bed asleep by 9:30.
Man, those are the days.
But it changed, but it was really good fun. And then as the years went by,
sorry to interrupt. Would you send those rolls away that night for safekeeping, or what would you'd have a stack otherwise? What did you do with them?
Well, you basically make a plan every now and again. When could I get to a major city? And then you'd ask around amongst your fellow photographers, do you know a laboratory in Grenoble, or do you know a laboratory in Lyon? And it was done like that. Some of the agency photographers were they never used slides. They went color negative, and or black and white prints from negatives, and they were doing that on site with lots of little mobile labs and everything else that they wouldn't share with you. They were doing their own thing. And then sometimes I did the tour once or twice for Sports Illustrated in the States, and they built a system whereby my films went from the Tour de France overnight to Paris, and then they'd fly them on Concorde next day to New York, and they'd do that every day for 3 weeks of the Tour de France. Amazing amount of money spent. But every evening in the press room, instead of going off to the pub, I'd have to wait for the courier to come to the press room in the Tour de France, hand over my films, write generic captions on the envelope, and then that bunch of films with the tour's drug supplies, the drug tests, and also the tour's internal postal system, everything goes back to Paris. At the other end in Paris, couriers would come to the airport and pick up the envelopes of film or the lab samples to be tested or the whatever, all these things. And then my films would go to New York next morning on Concorde. And
Wow.
and at the end of the 3-week race, they published 2 pictures. So
Is that right?
thousands of dollars spent just to have a couple of pictures of the Tour de France. But it
Did you ever lose any rolls of film or expose any or any disaster, catastrophe that happened?
not on the tour. I've had cars broken into before at various points of my career in various parts of the world, but never on the tour.
Did they take film or
Uh,
just it was all fun?
no, they took all my cameras many
Oh,
times
really?
over, and you do it once, and then you realise that never leave your passport in your car, nor your credit cards, and any exposed film, keep it with you. Don't leave it in the car.
Right, right.
And you learn very quickly, but it hurts when these robbers get you.
Rupert mentioned that he thought a bunch of film, that you had of Sean Kelly for a book you were creating got stolen. I Is he thinking about someone else, or was that you?
No, no, that's me.
Oh, no.
It's
What
part,
happened there?
well, it's a very strange thing. We had an English cycler called Tony Doyle. Was having a book published. A book was being written about him by a publisher in Northern England who I'd already worked with and who'd actually done a book with me on a few things. And Tony lived near me in South England, and we decided to meet this book publisher in Leeds in Northern England an hour after the race which Tony was racing in. So anyway, so Tony said, "Look, we live near each other. I'll drive you up there." So we went up to Leeds in his big BMW with 2 bikes on the roof and all my cameras inside, as well as um, my basically entire collection of Sean Kelly in slides. Because as well as Tony Doyle's book, they were also going to do a book on Sean Kelly. So anyway, so we went to Leeds, did the race. Tony raced the race, and I took the pictures of the race. And then we went out to dinner with the publisher in Leeds. Now, of course, as you do, you've got the car's locked, the slides are in the car, the cameras are in the car, the passport's in the car, Tony Doyle's bikes are on the roof, and all this. And we came out of the restaurant and went back to the car, said goodbye to the publisher, went back to the car. All the windows are smashed in. There's no bikes on the roof. There's nothing in the car at all. Everything went. The cameras, the slides, Tony's clothing went. Everything went. And
What did you do for
Uh,
the book?
I didn't cry. I didn't cry, but it's probably the most single worst thing that ever happened to me was when I lost probably 85% of my Sean Kelly collection. And obviously, these guys wanted the bicycles or the cameras, and they were just throwing the slides in the river somewhere.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was the valuable thing.
yeah, the lucky thing was Kelly went on racing for 3 or 4 years more, so I did manage to get another archive, but not the main one.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's a bigger story which will take an hour to explain to you. Yeah, but,
Oh, that's horrible.
yeah, yeah.
You know, when you're taking rolls of film of 36, tell me about how much more did you feel like you had to be extremely careful with making sure a photo was the photo versus today with digital and you could just machine gun them? Or was that just the way of the world at the time and you didn't think about it and you put your setting on a setting you knew would work? And how did you how did you get the photo when you couldn't screw it up?
I think because you had to get the picture, you had to get it. So every picture I took with a roll of film was carefully calculated. Um, Still spontaneous. You'd see something and you'd take a picture, but you had to be careful for one reason. 36 exposure film goes very quickly through the camera. If you take two pictures of something, it's going through the camera, and before you know it, you're going to run out of film at the very crucial moment when you don't need to be running out of film.
Mm.
So there's that thought. In other words, take a minimum amount of pictures and keep the film in your camera until such time you can wind it through and put a new roll of film in. It sounds amateurish now, but literally you couldn't waste a single shot. It takes 30 seconds to change a roll of film, but that's a long 30 seconds if something is happening in front of you and you haven't got a roll of film in your camera. So you're always aware that don't waste your film. Take a minimum amount. Less is more. Take a nice shot, but just take one shot. And you would, because I was a trained photographer in a studio, I would know when I'd taken the picture. You knew, because you are taking a picture of a human being, which helps. So if that human being is reacting to you in a certain way, and you've taken the picture, you know you've got the shot. You don't take 10 pictures. And also that's the main reason you have to take much fewer pictures. And where
I find like when I take a photo, usually the first one is someone with their eyes closed or some crazy, looking up or whatever. And did you get lots of those as well? And did you know that that's what happened? So you'd get another one, or did you just have to live with that?
Yeah, I think, when I say you get one shot, sometimes you took one or two,
Okay.
and you'd be seriously unlucky to get two shots of the same person with his eyes closed, or if the flash went off and kind of created a kind of reaction in his eyes, which
Yeah.
does happen.
Yeah.
You have to be seriously unlucky, but I think with cycling, I think cyclists are so at the end of a stage of the Tour de France, they're so tired and their eyes are glazed over that nothing would make their eyes close. They're just staring. No, they're staring ahead at wherever they're going, or they're in agony from some crash, or they're lost. And your camera captured that rather than them with their eyes closed, because their eyes couldn't close. They were just zombies,
Yeah. Yeah.
or they were so focused on what they were doing.
Right. When I was, looking up your background to do this interview, it dawned on me that you went through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, 2010s, 5 decades. It's huge, right? It's just a remarkable career of, you call it 40 years. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, I call it 40 years because technically it was, in that I started in July of '77 and finished in January of 2016. But in actual fact, I'm 4 or 5 months short of 40 years, because I should have gone on to the July of 2017, and then that's exactly 40 years. But in the sense of a calendar year, I was in that 40th year.
Yeah, yeah.
I wasn't going
Yeah.
to hang around for one more year, but and
Maybe a good way to bookmark your career, maybe just talk about some of these decades. What do you remember about the 70s in terms of the riders, the races? What signifies the 70s in your career?
in my case, it's the very late 1970s, and it was really the emergence of Bernardino.
Right.
I wouldn't say it was when I saw Eddie Merckx on the Champs Elysees in 1977. I was photographing him on the last on his last day in a Tour de France, and it was the last day. It was the last Tour de France day of his career. But really, I remember the '70s for the emergence of Hino,
Okay.
especially that. But as I've said many times, people like Sean Kelly and those guys coming up at that time as well. But predominantly, it was the ascension of Hino into the
What was special of Hino as a photographer?
I think it's the same you see in many champions. He had this presence. He's not a guy even now you'd go up to just casually and have a chat. You had to really summon up the courage to go and talk to him. And as a photographer, you saw this character of his without talking to him. You literally saw it, and you had to photograph it. And it was actually very easy because he what you saw is what he is. He's a very proud man, very not arrogant, but physically quite extraordinary, you know. And you're drawn to people like him, as indeed you are throughout those years. When another cyclist is there's something about them that I can't put it into words, but they have a presence which demands to be photographed in a certain way.
Right.
And it turns out he was as dominating in real life as he was in a picture. You know, he was anything in the picture that mattered.
Yeah, right. In the 80s, you had like Roche, Kelly, Anderson, Lamond, as well, Fignon. What were some of the standout battles that you got to witness in the 80s, and what did that mean as a photographer?
Well, the 80s really means the beginning of Greg LeMond's career.
Yeah.
And I think most of that time I was watching him um, summon up the courage to race against Hino, because he spent many of those years racing for him. And he wanted Greg to not man up exactly, but just to have the courage to go against Hino. And it took like 2 or 3 years too long for him to actually have a go, because he was, I think he was scared of the guy. Most people were scared of Hino. And I think the 80s that's what struck out to me as being one of the examples of not just how good Hino was, but how hard it was for others to step into Hino's shoes.
Well, especially on the same team and go against him.
The same team, and also the 80s was quite a mix because Fignon came up, Laurent Fignon came up,
Yeah.
another Frenchman. Hino started falling down with his bad knees on a few occasions, and Laurent Fignon came in, won 2 tours. And again, it kind of held Greg LeMond back perhaps by one more year. You, you, you think Greg could have come through in '84 and had a really good crack at the tour, but he couldn't. And then Greg got shot, got wounded, missed all of '87. In '88, he wasn't himself. But then Roach popped up out of nowhere and won the tour in '87. So the 1980s decade is a real mix of many things. And at the
And
end,
it seems like a coming of age too, with English speaking writers really, as you mentioned before, coming to prominence.
yeah, I mean, Kelly, like you say, Kelly had come in, and then we had Robert Miller and Stephen Roach, Bill Anderson. There was a growing list of people coming over. Alan Piper, and they all came to Europe and made one heck of a international scene out of what was basically a European sport.
And I imagine you probably would have gotten fairly close, I imagine, to a lot of the English speaking writers being a fairly small minority, or what
No,
was that like?
no, I was a pretty shy individual. I didn't really. My 5 years as a trainee photographer, I've been told don't try and socialize with the person you're photographing.
Yeah,
Stand
right.
stand back, judge them, talk,
Okay.
yes, but only with a view of getting the best shot of them.
Right.
Because I was doing like high class portraits, as they were called, and you had to know exactly when to take the picture. So getting to know somebody is not going to help you take better pictures of them. It's
Yeah, yeah.
worse because you'll get so cozy and chatty with them that you don't know when's the best time to take a picture. You need to stand back and just wait for the right moment. So I never really got to know them. I talked to them obviously, but never took the time to have a chat. And I was probably very overawed by your Kellys of the world and your Phil Andersons, who were very good cyclists, and I was a complete failure. So you had to be aware you couldn't go in and talk to them as a fan.
Mm,
So
yeah.
the result was I just stood back and let them get on with their jobs, and I got my job done. And years later, when they've retired, when they're not so focused, then you've got to know them much, much better.
It's interesting though, because, the nature of a journalist, it might be that you might upset people, right? And your role if as a photographer, I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're probably more well liked universally because you're taking photos of people in amazing situations and really, I wouldn't say, glamorizing them, but, you know, you're really documenting history, right?
Yeah. I mean, yes, you're absolutely spot on because cyclists need to trust you, and or at least if they're going to have a chat with you about something, they don't want to be asked a question that's going to stress them out or make them feel suspicious of you. So eventually, I didn't really ask them much. I just did my job, and I was lucky enough to work for the right magazines at the right time. These cyclists, these not just English speaking, but all of them got hold of Winning Magazine or Ciclismo a Fondo or Bicycling Australia, and they suddenly saw pictures of themselves in the magazines. And obviously, Phil Anson would expect to be seen in an Australian magazine, but Alan Piper maybe not, or later Neil Stevens. Suddenly, they get their pictures in their country's premier magazine, and they suddenly think Graham did that. They automatically warm to the photographer who's got them published in a magazine, whereas the journalist perhaps hasn't bothered interviewing that cyclist because he's not important enough.
Mm,
So,
mm.
yeah, so I did have a rapport with them, but only really came out in retirement, when they're in their retirement, when they come up to you and as a friend and, have a bit of a laugh. And it was especially so in Spain because they'd never had a color magazine based around cycling. And suddenly there I was in Spain going to all these Spanish races, not speaking a word of Spanish. And these young Spanish guys, they come up to you and said hello in Spanish and then later in English. And definitely, a rapport was built, which wouldn't have been the case if I'd been a journalist.
Yeah.
Because
Although Rupert hasn't done so bad for himself with
no,
rapport
no,
and
no, that's
being a
absolutely
white
true.
guy.
That's Rupert. But back then in the 80s and early 90s, I think it's a very different scene. I think cyclists they weren't suspicious. They just hadn't been trained. None of them had media training, and often and there were no buses, so you'd have Sean Kelly sitting on the bonnet of his car with nowhere to go, and journalists come out and wanting to talk to him, and him having to think of answers that he'd rather not bother with.
Yeah, yeah.
But yes, I take your point, and it's one of the nicest things about my work at the time, and also looking back on it, was that I never really knowingly upset anybody or got in their way, or and as a photographer, you can do that. You don't have to be in the media scrum at the end of a stage trying to get a shot of the cyclist as he drinks a bottle of water. You just leave him alone.
Yeah, yeah. How about the '90s? What's representative of the '90s for you?
Ooh, 90s is probably the first half. Definitely is the domination of Miguel Indurain in all three tours, the Vuelta, the Giro, and the Tour. They never really won the Vuelta. And then to me the sport changed a bit because the second half of the 90s wasn't anywhere near as attractive because I think there was a streak of Italians winning everything, and it almost made the sport quite boring. I do remember that there was like quite a move towards all these Italians winning these races. In some ways, it wasn't they're Italian. It was just they're all from the same country. It wasn't. I noticed that quite a lot. It just wasn't quite so enjoyable, you know. But it came back in the early 2000s. But I remember the second half of the 90s was a little bit of a strange time. And although looking back on it, you go to a race not knowing who was going to win. You in the 80s, you know who'd win Paris-Roubaix or Tour of Flanders. But in the second half of the 90s, you didn't know. So it's kind of in some ways, it's attractive, but also I think also the second half of the 90s, I think, if I remember rightly, that there weren't quite so many of my guys, the English-speaking guys, around. There'd been a little bit of a dip, and it just wasn't quite the same for a few years.
Right.
Still nice,
And
but not
in
quite.
the 2000s?
Well, I was totally captivated by Tom Boner and Fabian Cancellara.
Oh, yeah.
Their careers weren't side by side exactly. They were kind of just overlapped a little bit. Perhaps they overlapped by 2 or 3 years too many. But those two guys, away from the Grand Tours, away from everything else, they were the stars of the classics.
Yeah.
And probably, if looking back on the 30 or 40 years, those two guys probably together or individually, I remember more than most other cyclists because they were just titans. They were just gigantic guys. I think
Yeah.
Tom Bowden kind of started winning classics in 2004ish maybe, whereas Fabian kind of got into it a little bit later.
Yeah.
Uh, and we did enjoy some of the years when they literally were in the same races, Paris-Roubaix, Ghent-Wevelgem, and Tour of Flanders, and
Mm.
when they actually did race against each other. But there were just a few years when one would crash out, the other one would crash out, or just literally one started his classics career a little bit before the other one. But I mean, when you think of the Paris-Roubaix and Flanders we've seen, and they were both similarly talented, both huge men, both capable of riding 60K by themselves at the end of a 7-hour classic. And I still don't know. I think I give Cancellara the edge. Who's the better of the two?
Yeah.
Because he comes from a fairly non-cycling nation, Switzerland, whereas Tom is a Flemish from day one.
Mm.
Cycling was born into his blood, whereas Fabian it came later.
Yeah.
And I think as an outsider, Fabian just wins a little bit by just perhaps winning more classics or just having a little bit of an edge.
Yeah.
And
And where they battled was some of the, most amazing places to photograph, I imagine. Flanders, Roubaix,
Yeah,
everything you had to work with was phenomenal.
I think when you see them in the Tour of Flanders, when they go up the Muur of Gerasbergen, or Muur de Grammont, if you like, and I think a couple of times they actually got to that hill together. And once Fabian dropped Tom Boonen, I think early years Tom dropped Cancellara. It was and it was fantastic. The noise when they went up that hill, and the people, the crowd, the cheers, and
Yeah.
the Flemish were cheering for Cancellara as well. They just loved it, and they became good friends. You know,
Yeah.
I think they both went to each other's retirement parties.
Yeah, right.
I think if I look at all the years, apart from, I love the stage race, I love the tours and the Giros and the Vueltas and that. I think those two guys in the classics have probably, it seems like 10 years they raced together. Uh,
Mm,
Probably a lot less, but that was like one of the highlights of my whole career.
yeah.
It was fantastic to see.
This podcast is fully funded by our members at Escape Collective. In fact, all of our content on our website and our podcast network is 100% supported by our members who believe that cycling media should be independent from the sport and industry we cover, and that we should exist to serve you rather than live or die by our ability to be a platform for the sole purpose of selling you more stuff. If you enjoy this podcast or any of our other work and believe in our mission of independence, please go to escapecollective.com/join and become a member today. Thank you for your support. Did that, the success that Lance Armstrong had and how he raised the profile of the tour and cut it through a lot to the mainstream, did that flow on to your career being more, were your photos selling more? Were books selling more?
Uh,
Was it good for you?
yes, yes, and it has to be also going back to a technical point of view that the late 90s, early 2000s was when we went digital.
Right.
And that in itself changed the whole, changed the world, but also changed the business I was in
Yeah.
and how I covered the sport. And Lance came along and won the Tour in '99, and it was quite nice because I was the only one in his kind of unofficial family who was taking pictures of him all the time, every day. And because we were still in the film world in '99, all these huge corporations like Nike and Powerbar and Trek bicycles were coming to me for the pictures. They
Mm,
couldn't get them from anywhere else.
right.
And so that started quite a mighty, uh, you know, I'll say the word business with because of Lance Armstrong. And then it went digital, so and which expanded the interest, but also it became more competitive. You know, everybody was able to send their pictures of Lance Armstrong to Trek and to Nike and
Yeah.
Power,
Okay.
but it was still a very powerful time of, to be around as a photographer.
How about 2010s? What stands out to you in the tens?
2010s. Ooh, you're testing my memories from is going back to front. Uh, 2010s. I think of me. I was extremely happy when Cadell won the World Championships in 2009.
Mm.
2009. Yes,
Uh, or was it 10 and then he won? Yeah, 9.
2009, and in 2010 he was wearing the jersey.
Then he won the tour in 11, didn't he?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
Mm.
sometimes you get mix the two up, but so we should say 2009 was one of the highlights of that decade because he was a guy who only knew about hard work. He was obviously talented, but he needed to do more than to be talented. He needed to work very hard and be very lucky on the day. And this day in Mendrisio, Switzerland, he won the world, and it almost like capped off that decade really.
Yeah.
To see him win finally because he didn't win much. He didn't win much, and then the tour in 2011. Again, that's the first highlight of that decade. And it's just there's so many little individual examples of that decade which you know they're great times. We're still also in that decade we were coming out of the shadows of we'll call it the Lance Armstrong period. The sport was definitely cleaning itself up and had slowed down towards the end of that decade. And then we saw a very different kind of cycling come in where you didn't know who was going to win, and it was quite inspiring.
What about, I remember when Cadel won the tour, and I'm Canadian, not Australian, so but I still had a lump in my throat when Cadel won, and to see how proud all the Australians were, and it was phenomenal, right? And I still get that lump in my throat. Did you get that feeling when Wiggins won the tour?
Uh, in a different sort of way. I was very, very proud of him. Uh, I must admit, I thought he'd win in 2011. He fell off and broke his collarbone, but I thought he'd win that year as well. We'll never know. So yeah, when he won in 2012, it was fantastic. But I was, if I can use the word friendship, I was definitely a friend of Cadell, and not necessarily a friend of Bradley because he didn't really let people near him that much. But I was extremely proud of him, and I knew how hard he'd trained, how he'd gone from being a track rider in the team pursuit to becoming the winner of the Tour de France. It's one heck of a transition, and it didn't come overnight. He worked for it, and it was wonderful. But it also welded into the Olympic Games in London. So the memory of the Tour de France wasn't short lived, but it got slightly um, overwhelmed by the Olympics being in my hometown. Although Bradley won the gold medal in the time trial, which is also fantastic, I didn't really have a chance to really, really sit down and look back on the Tour de France in 2012 and think that was fantastic. The two events were back to back, and I must admit, now I look at the pictures and I remember that day, when Bradley won in Paris. But at the time, it was hard to enjoy it because the tour ended on the Sunday, and I think the preliminary things for the London Olympics were like the following Thursday. It was you just couldn't hang around and have a beer or anything. So
Jeez.
yeah.
I remember when I took a photography course once, and the hardest, I guess, assignment I ever had was the instructor said, "Go out this weekend and take photos of something you hate." And that's just not intuitive for a photographer, is it? Like, why would I want to do that? And maybe it speaks to why Instagram is more or less a happy place versus, social media elsewhere. But anyway, and it got me thinking, you've actually your job is to document the sport, and there are some things in there that, goodness me, aren't so pleasant. I mean, you've been through 1995, Fabio Casatelli. What was it like doing your job then when tragedy like that happens?
Yeah, it's a very good question, very deep question. When the thing with Castatelli happened, I wasn't there actually, which is one good thing as a photographer. You're not there, then you don't have a point of view.
Okay.
Just you remember the sadness of the whole Tour de France, and also the wonderful way I think was the next day when the Motorola team rode at the front of the peloton the whole day. The whole day, they didn't cancel the stage. They said, no, we're going to ride the stage neutralized as a tribute. And it set the tone for the few other tragic events that happened in the years that followed. But that day was amazing in that it was a huge long stage through the Pyrenees. And most people would have said, look, okay, we'll transfer in the cars for 100k and then we'll ride the last 100k. And Motorola said, no, we're going to ride from, I think it was from Tarbes to right through the Pyrenees, over the Orbis, I think the Tourmalet as well, and it ended up in Pau. And it must have been like an 8-hour stage. And it was, everybody had the chance, if it was 7 hours or 8 hours, everybody on the tour had that long to actually just think about Castatelli. And I thought, how many other sports would have still raced or ridden their bikes, continued, and as a way of tributing rather than just cancel the game today. But these guys rode. They said, no, we're going to ride all the way through the Pyrenees, and then at the very end they let the Motorola team take off in the last 3k coming into Pau, and it was so it was sad, but it was also very it was more admiring. It was just impressive to see these cyclists, doing a tribute to their fallen comrade. That's what made me feel very good, because you're part of the sport, like you're part of the sport, and you feel some emotions, not the same as the cyclist would, but you're touched by it. All of us, the media, as well as all the cyclists involved and the team managers and the fans, were able to kind of use that 7 or 8 hours as their tribute as well. It's not a silent tribute, but a tribute. It's not many sports would do that.
Yeah. You've been through a few of those. I mean, like Andrei Kivilev, Wouter Wayland, and even horrific crashes like Davis Finney, for example. How do you go about that as a photographer, like to do your job sensitively and do photos like that? Do you take them? Do they ever leave your camera, or how do you handle that?
Well, luckily with Cassatelli, I wasn't there, so I never had to uh, deal with the emotions.
Uh huh.
With Walter Wayland, I was there literally. You see a lot of crashes every day in your job, and most of them are, the worst thing you're going to see is a broken bone or a bit of blood or something. But and you don't think about it. But when I saw Walter Wayland on the ground coming down this mountain, naturally you take a picture because you got a camera in your hand. It's like a policeman with a whistle. You do it without thinking. And then I looked and I thought, oh. I said to my driver, "Just go. He's dead." I didn't know he was dead. And my driver said, "You sure?" And I said, "He's dead." He looked dead. And but I had taken pictures, and it doesn't come out on the race radio to say a cyclist has died. But by the time we got to the press room, and everyone was so somber, and they said he died, you know, had a horrible crash. And the first thing I did was I deleted my pictures. I only took about four, and in a burst, and I deleted every one because I knew within 5 minutes someone was going to come up to me and say, "Have you got a picture we can use?" How it goes. So I didn't think about it. It's literally deleted straight away so that I could say to somebody, "Yeah, I've deleted." Eventually, an Italian photographer, sold his pictures um, to an agency, and they appeared all over the world. Um, and then Davis Finney was a different situation. He was coming back from a flat tire downhill in Liège, Bastogne Liège, and a car a bit further down the road had stopped to service another rider. And Davis was quite new to the sport in those days, as far as European sport, which means cars everywhere, motorbikes, just constant, obstacles got around. And he smashed straight into the back window of a parked team car. And at that time, I had actually been taking pictures of Davis coming back through the convoy behind me, going past me, and then heading into this back of this team car, and you just continue shooting. And this is on slide film, and it was the worst thing I ever saw. If I saw Walter Wayland dead, it wasn't as bad as Davis Finney crashing into the back of a car because he was face first. It was horrible, and I had these pictures on a roll of film which wouldn't get developed for another day. And so then I had to really think, what am I going to do? Because in those days I was working for Winning Magazine, and they were based in Brussels in Belgium. And of course, them being the way they were, they wanted the film straight away because they could syndicate the pictures to agencies in Belgium. And I managed to hold the films back for a day.
Yeah.
They weren't very happy, but I did, and it gave me the chance to get the film processed by myself and cut out the strip of slides where this accident thing was. But I didn't throw them away. I put them away somewhere, and then handed over the other pictures to the magazine. And they were none the wiser. They didn't know I'd taken the shots. And years later, I've still got them. I have used one, but I make sure it's used in a more illustrative way than anything else.
Yeah.
And I've spoken many times to Davis since, and to Connie Carpenter, his wife. You know, that's where they'll stay. They'll stay out of sight,
Mm.
unless for a very special reason.
Yeah.
So sometimes every situation is different. Sometimes you are the cold blooded photographer. Sometimes you act spontaneously without thinking about it. But sometimes you have the chance to actually think about what you're doing, and either delete your pictures if you can, or cut out the slides so that they can't be seen anywhere.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's got to be very conflicting because if you see a horrific crash and then everyone stops around and you see the photographers get off and taking photos, and I think a lot of people think that's very insensitive. But you're also there. You're documenting the sport. You don't know what's happening at the time, right? And it's how to actually judge that on the moment. It's got to be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, again, both back then in the 80s and even before I retired, yeah, if there's 10 photographers on a race, or if there's 16 photographers on motorbikes on the Tour de France, I would think probably at least 10 of those are agency photographers who photograph the Tour de France one day, and then next week they could be photographing the president of France going on trip to Guadeloupe or somewhere, and that's very different. They have emotions, but they're not bound by constraints or discretion or anything else.
They don't have to
Uh,
look at anyone in the next
they
day, do they?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Whereas I lived with these guys, and the last thing I want them to think of, oh shit, there's Graham there. He's gonna, I don't want that. So you really do think about, how you're gonna approach everything. And, looking back on it, it seemed to work out okay.
yeah, yeah.
There's been times when I've taken a picture of a cyclist who's crashed, not badly, just a French guy, probably about 10, 12 years ago, and he wasn't hurt, but he was on the ground. He said, "No, no, please don't," and I didn't. He's literally said, without saying it, "I don't want my picture taken because his wife will see the shots, or his family, or his children." He wasn't hurt. He's just like a graze on his calf muscle.
Yeah.
But it was actually a rare moment when someone said, "No, please don't."
Huh.
And a few times I've had cyclists come up and say, uh, they come up next one, "Did you get a shot of that?" They actually want to know if you've got it, and I say, "Yeah, yeah." And George Hincapie was one of these, because he fell off right by the motorbike one day in the Tour Down Under, and he was only on the ground for 2 seconds, and I got these pictures. And then in the evening in Adelaide, in the hotel there, as it happens, you've had your dinner, you're going into the elevator, and there in the elevator is George Hincapie with a kind of a bandage around his knee. And it's the worst case scenario. Is you've just taken a person you know very, very well. He's fallen off his bike. He's been a bit cut up. He's a bit angry. He's also wearing the American Champions jersey. And here I am walking into the lift a few hours after dinner. And I looked at him, and he was smiling. He said, "I suppose you got the shot." And I said, "Yeah." And I said straight away, "You okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm fine." He said, but he said, "Could you just email me the pictures?" So you get things where they want to see themselves after a crash. But equally, also, you still get situations whereby you've taken a shot, they know you've taken the shots, and you'll get a call from a PR guy from the team asking you, and almost always I'd say, "Don't worry, I won't. You won't see them."
Yeah, yeah.
But that's it's a sport unique like that. I mean, any other you're photographing, you're not gonna show any kind of tragedy or human misery. It doesn't happen. Whereas cycling, even a shot like a cyclist who's fallen off and is by the doctor's car in a race, and there's no such thing as discretion there. You've got all these TV cameras and photographers, milling around the car, and he's got blood coming out of his ear or down his elbow, and there's no privacy.
Yeah.
It's a
It's
unique sport, like that.
it is, it is. How would you describe yourself? Would you describe yourself as an early adopter or a laggard with technology? How have you worked professionally and personally with technology and throughout your career?
I'm definitely not a laggard, nor am I a progressive geek.
Yeah, you're right in
Um,
the middle.
my motivation always was to get the best pictures I could, and then find the quickest way possible of getting them to my clients, or these days on social media, on tweeting them as soon as you could. So kind of, I'm a hybrid of someone who's really a laggard,
Yeah,
and some geek. In other words, I went with every phase. I used to work with, in the very beginning, black and white film, and then we progressed to color slides, because of my clients being magazines that wanted slides, not a print, because there's a difference in quality. And so I had to keep going through that, and I stayed with film until 2001, when I bought my first digital camera, because everybody else was getting ahead of me. And then 2003, I put down my film cameras for the last time, because I was getting caught by other photographers with lesser pictures but quicker. They were getting their stuff quicker to the clients.
right. Okay.
And then that kind of made me realize I've really got to move with times. And I used to take a mobile film laboratory with me on the tour, and used to process my color slides before the digital age. Used to process my slides in the press room after the race. There was no more going down the pub. It was get the mobile lab out and spend 2 or 3 hours developing your color slides, which is a very critical process, and then scanning them in and then emailing them.
You do that in the press room.
Do that in the press room.
What was a mobile lab look like? Was it like a briefcase or was it a tent?
Yeah,
Was it
oh no, it was bigger than a briefcase. It was a suitcase. In
right?
fact, no, it was a trunk. It was a trunk. you're an old pioneer and you wanted to travel around the world, you'd take your trunk.
How did you bring a trunk around with you? Must have had wheels and, like, a
Yeah, it was
wheelbarrow.
on wheels, but I would, yeah. By the time I was doing this, like late '80s, early '90s, I had a car driver as well as a motorbike driver, so it went in the
Okay.
car, as well as all these 5 litre canisters of chemicals and everything else.
Jeez.
No, I wasn't ahead of my time, as you just said, nor was I behind, but I was just being very stubborn to stick with colour slides, which gave you the quality to have your pictures published in magazines. I was against photographers who worked for newspapers who didn't need that quality, you know. But eventually, when social media came in, first of all, I didn't just have a digital camera. I ended up buying an iPad, and I can't remember when it was. It was the late. It was like 2008, 2009. I bought an iPad, and sometimes there was enough 3G signal floating around France or Europe or Switzerland whereby I could take a picture on a camera, plug a cable in, um, spend a couple of minutes not looking at the bike rate on the back of a motorbike, and actually sending images out on my iPad.
Yeah, right.
That was the first. So I was ahead of everybody,
Yeah.
and people were looking at me like Cadell came past me one day in the Tour de France, and he saw me not looking at the race. I had my head down looking at this iPad. There's a cable out of the iPad going to the camera, and he came alongside and he I can't remember what he said. It was like very nice, but he says like you're ahead of the pack, you know. Um, and then I had my own website when nobody else had a website. Uh, many things where once I realised I had to, start setting a bit of a, tempo to my career. I was quite ahead of it.
Sounds like when you see an opportunity that this could be beneficial to what you
Well,
do, you'd
yeah, basically, I was aware of the fact that I was no longer taking slides. Um, it was a digital world. It was led by speed, and quality was becoming not quite so important. I moved with that, and lastly, before I quit, I was luckily able to get a camera with a transmitter in it. So instead of taking black and white pictures back in the day, or processing slides in a press room, or even using an iPad to send pictures on the motorbike, suddenly I was using a little gadget which transmitted your pictures out of your camera as you took them, and these went back to my database in London. And literally within a minute of you taking the picture, that image was online to anybody wanting it. They used it. It was and that's where I signed off. That was there's been no further development as far as I know.
yeah, yeah,
So,
it's fantastic. As we sort of talked about before, as a photographer, your job is to document the sport and that it is what it is. There's no opinion around that. Were there ever times where you were really biting your tongue to give an opinion, and wished your job had entailed that? And if so, is there a way to do that through photography?
you mean as use my photography to tell a story, or me to make
More
a
like
story?
to give your opinion on a story. Like, is that possible in photography?
Um, yes, these days it is.
Yeah,
These days it is because of social media. It's become when I first started years ago. You were a photographer who the expression was never seen, never heard, um, or you're a journalist who never took pictures and just wrote stories. And it was partly because of old union, you know, restrictions. You had to be a journalist or a photographer or a street cleaner or work in a bank. You couldn't be all three. And, and then that over the years that broke down to the point where you could use your photography and illustrate it with text. And
okay.
it's called photojournalism.
Yep, yep.
But and I was when I realised that the world was changing, and I had gone digital, and I did have a laptop, and I was on email, and social media came, and I was quite happy to make my opinion felt on certain subjects using my photography as a backup.
Yeah, yeah,
And but I enjoyed it quite a lot because the one thing you realise when you do one work in one business for all those years, the same as you, is you know an awful lot about your business. I knew an awful lot about cycling. And I knew an awful lot more about Fabian Cancellara than a journalist would, because you see Fabian day in, day out. So you had an awful lot of information, experience to share. And I did try and do it. I mean, I still do something. I still write a blog now and again. Um, it's kind of fun to talk about your favorite subject,
yeah,
and not everybody gets the chance to do it.
Yeah.
And I mean, anybody can write a blog now, but if you write a blog because of what you've seen, then you're already ahead of someone else who's just writing a blog.
Yeah.
And I have enjoyed, and I've indulged quite a bit to write. You know, some of the books I've had published were with me writing all the text as well as supplying the photography. So it's I say it's a privilege knowing something so as well as I do, to be able to put it into words and pictures. But I know at the end of the day, I'm glad I was a photographer, not a journalist.
I know social media has shown its teeth to you in the past, and I don't think anyone got out of the Lance Armstrong era unscathed, and it blows my mind that includes you. And I do remember a point of controversy when someone came to buy a photo from you, saw of Greg LeMond, and had there was the tag apparently a fool, and this I think an email exchange got made public between you, and it might have not shown you in the most favorable light. But tell me about that and what that experience was like being in the middle of a social media just
Storm.
shitstorm.
Yeah, I mean, it was a shock because it was the first. I can't remember when it was. It was, do you know? It's like,
I think it
was
was
it
2010.
2010? Okay. Yeah, I mean, first, in the media that followed cycling, there were people who liked Lance and people who hated him. And obviously, I liked him because not because he's famous or because he made me a lot of money. I just liked him. And didn't mean to say also I dislike Greg. I like Greg an awful lot. He was great for my career when he raced. He was great. Um, but the basic story is, and so by that time also I was, well into the digital mode, social media everywhere, and keeping on Twitter, all that stuff, without realizing that it can work against you in a very savage way. Um,
Yeah.
and what it was that I changed my website. The original website was grahamwatts.com, and I think we wound it up in 2009. I had an American partner, and we wound up the business, and I took it over, which meant going to get a new website designed and with galleries for all these famous cyclists. And it was a company in Texas, and which wasn't the problem because Texas is a very IT savvy state. It was back then, and they built all these galleries for me. And I said, "You've got to have Greg LeMond Gallery, Miguel Indurain, Sean Kelly, Stephen Roach," and they typed them all out. And in those days, you had to go to a thing. You had the URL, which I didn't in those days. I didn't know what a URL was. I had people doing that for me. And then as well as that, you then had to put in a friendly URL for some reason, like a backup URL if something happened. And so they did these things, and Miguel Indurain was Big Mig. Pantani, I think, was Elefanta. And it wasn't me making the friendly names. It was the designer who was also a cyclist. And I forget, it was Jar Jar for Jalabert. I can't remember what Kelly was called, but everybody had a kind of a nickname.
A
And
friendly URL for people to run.
URL.
Yeah,
And of course, this guy, maybe because he's from Texas or not,
yeah.
he put in full.
Okay.
And I didn't even know. I didn't even see it. All I saw was just the gallery. I couldn't care less. And somehow the company that the server or whatever, they did a dimensions, and this URL, friendly URL, came up as being the URL. And this some guy tried to buy a print or something in the Greg LeMond Gallery, and he looked at the thing at the top, the URL, full. And that's where it all started from.
Offense to that.
And I was horrified when I realized what had happened. And I had the guy change it straight away. He said, "Oh, it's someone probably hacked into it, but whatever." And yeah, it was a tricky situation.
How did
And
it
as
feel? I've been through these social media shitstorms. I must go through them once a month, but it's the worst, isn't it? It's the absolute worst feeling in the world.
yeah, I mean, one of the good things was that I hadn't done it,
Right.
but
Okay.
but there it was,
Yeah.
and half the world thought I had. And so there are several things I had to do. First of all, I had to get the thing changed.
Yeah.
Uh, Secondly, I had to explain myself to Greg, who knows me very no, but he was it was that time when him and Lance were snapping at each other, and probably Greg didn't know who was on his side and who wasn't. And then I had to the thing I did wrong was I went back to the person and apologized,
Yeah.
and it made things even worse. What I should have done is just said nothing,
Yeah, yeah.
because on social media or on Twitter or whatever you like, what you say, everybody's going to see, especially if it's been sparked up by some firestorm somewhere. Anyway, after a few days, well, no, after a few weeks and months, it died down. It took a while, and what I learned from day one when it happened was, don't say a word.
Yeah.
It'll pass.
Yeah. It will. It will.
Most things on
8
Twitter
hours.
pass in a day, but this went on for weeks. But it eventually it passed, and I've seen Greg and, explained everything, and, but it was, if you think of what was going on over there in the States at the time, and here I was, little me, innocent, not so innocent, but thinking I was innocent, and, I was well and truly, in the line of fire.
When the internet shows its teeth, it's not pretty yet. But fortunately, like you say, the mob will move elsewhere. They'll bring their pitchforks elsewhere. Um, Usually it's 24 to 48 hours, but yeah, having to endure weeks of that is not something I'd wish on anybody.
No, I mean, I definitely wouldn't want to be a journalist, working today, because I know you take it all in your stride, and people criticize your work, and don't worry about it, but it's constant. If you just say one thing that someone disagrees with, you know,
Yeah, yeah, I guess it's a two-way conversation now, and I guess the fact that your audience has is more powerful than you are in their voice, it really keeps you honest, makes sure that you can back up what you say and you can't be loose with it too. So it is, I guess, a blessing as well if you look at it that way. That's the way I try to look at it anyway. I'm curious, in a lot of the podcasts I've done so far, it has been with people who've grown businesses. And with yourself, it's absolutely a business you've grown. You've written books. You've created the Graham Watson brand. Did you ever consider, or maybe you did, but creating an agency, as something that you could building an asset that you could step away from and have your name, like Corvos perhaps, or and such that you could step back and remain an asset that other people could, run the business for you, so to speak, like on the ground. Is that something that you considered? And
do you mean, actually, uh, not being erased, and
you could have, many apprentice photographers photographing for you, and
mm,
I imagine like Corvos does. He doesn't go out there and photograph anymore, and we buy the photos, and we don't really even look at who the photographer is half the time. Did you ever
yeah.
consider a business model like that?
Yes, but very, I'm very old-fashioned in this way.
Right. Didn't
I
interest you.
mean, there's a lot of, when I was working in the last 5 years or so, there's a lot of, interaction between photographers, because you can't be everywhere. You can't be in Paris and Tirreno Adriatico in a normal year. So you end up working with a photographer, and you end up helping each other, and which is basically what you're saying. And I had to do it because clients wanted pictures from Tirreno Adriatico as well as Paris Nice without paying extra for the Tirreno pictures. So, and equally, someone in Italy wanted pictures of Paris Nice, which they couldn't get without going there. So, but then you're kind of corrupting your. To me, it was like integrity,
Mm,
and we've all done it. And I know journalists borrow a quote from somebody else, and dare I say it, plagiarize something from, it goes on.
mhm.
But to actually establish a business whereby I was paying other people to be Graham Watson,
Right.
uh, no, no,
That was
definitely.
your work and that your name was attached to it indefinitely. Is that how you saw
Yeah,
it?
to me, it's not cheating, but it's, you're kidding your fans, the people who've been loyal to you over the years. You're kidding. Not everybody knows that the picture hasn't been taken by you. They think, oh, Graham's still working. He's 85 years old, and he's just done Paris Roubaix. uh, I didn't want to go to the business side of it, whereby it's an agency.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't the reason why I stopped. But I much enjoyed the days when I was, me going to a race, not with my roller film, but with my own digital camera, and those pictures were my pictures.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to pay somebody to go and do a race I couldn't get to,
Yeah.
although you have to. It's to me, I'm kind of a purist like that,
Yeah.
and so that was the answer, no.
But
And
w
also, but I wanted to actually step away from business altogether. When I stopped in 2006, 2017, it's because I wanted to stop.
Mm.
I still live off my archive. I mean, people still buy pictures off me, which gives me a lot of pleasure and a little bit of extra beer money now and again. Um, but as far as making a business out of it now, I think not just living down in New Zealand and being 12 hours ahead of Europe, and therefore having to be up all night to
Mm.
maintain the pictures coming in. No, I just wanted to leave it all behind and
Yeah.
you know keep it as clean and simple as possible.
You co-authored or authored over 20 books. Were these kind of haphazard decisions just based on what you wanted to do, or was it trying to get, I guess, passive income going throughout your career, or what was the decision behind your books?
Well, first of all, I got into it because maybe a journalist like John Wilcox or Rupert Guinness or somebody else was writing a book in the late 80s, and because I was everybody's best friend, they came to me for pictures. So the relationships built with book publishers around the world, and then one book publisher in the UK, a company called Springfield Books, which is no longer around, they said we'd like to do a book with you, and I was like, what? I was so shocked. And they said, no, you've already done 12, 15 years of cycling photography. We think there's a book to be had. And it was called Visions of Cycling. And it meant, and I think also by then, maybe they'd spotted the fact that also I was able to write. So, but that was them coming to me and saying, let's do a book. And I laughed, but it was a massive selling book. Literally Visions of Cycling, one photographer's vision of cycling. And it led to a whole follow up from other publishers, follow up from the same publishers, different ideas for different books. And so I can't say it was my idea. Someone came to me. But then, a bit like everything else I've done, I saw the opportunity straight away. And I realized also how hard it is to do a book. As you know, it's really hard work. And they don't all work out. So it's nice to be taken very seriously. And as years went by, I did some of my own books, published my own books. If I wasn't happy with what a publisher was offering in terms of content, like it's always restrained by economy. If a publisher wanted to make a book of 20 years of Paris-Roubaix but only use 20 pictures, I wasn't interested. I wanted 100 pictures in my 20-year Paris-Roubaix book, and often I would be disappointed by a publisher suggesting something, or me saying to a publisher, "Could we do a book on Paris-Roubaix or whatever?" And I'd say to myself, "Graham, just do it yourself." And you just do it. It's hard work and it's expensive and risky. At the end of the day, it's purely from a satisfaction point of view. I have a book which I wanted, to produce. It's complete. It's not missing bits. It's not been. I mean, the business side wasn't always working because I'm spending more money than I'm getting. But in the long term, it paid off because you were producing this fantastic book or books, and money wasn't always the limiting factor. So I kind of used. So I didn't use it, but the publishers did books on me or with me in the early years, and I learned from that. And I thought, okay, well, I think I can do it a little bit better if I do it this way. And certainly, some of the books I produced by myself were more complete. Probably didn't make as much money, but it doesn't matter because in the long term, it always comes back to you. You know.
How many people have a career that you can see in a book? Like, it must
Mm.
bring back so many memories.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could have the last one I did. I could have run, twice the thickness, but but there's things you don't realize is that a book weighs a lot, and
Yeah.
if you're trying to at least get your money back, and you're charging 65, US dollars or Australian dollars, if you like, and the postage of anyone buying the books and also is going to cost another $65, is a bit of a problem. So things like that you don't think about at the time of doing them because you just want to do it. Want to make the book so perfect. Um, but
I
yeah,
don't
I mean,
think any of us would be in the cycling industry if money was the main driver. Um,
yeah, yeah,
but we love it,
yeah.
don't we?
No, you want it to happen, and it is a privilege doing them because you've got all this experience to show to somebody to share with people, but also you've got people who are actually interested in the book,
Yeah.
and not everybody can say that.
So your first race, 1977, in Paris all the way to 2017, 40 years, like I said, 5 decades. What was the lead up to your decision, and what was the thinking behind it in 2017 after you retired, or up until you retired at the Tour Down Under?
Just the Tour Down Under, or I mean the whole build up to me still.
What was the build up in your decision-making process up until the Tour Down Under? How long were you thinking about retiring, and what came to that decision for you?
To me, it's very simple. I met a lady from New Zealand
Yes?
in 2001, I think 2002.
Uh-huh.
She was living in London, but she was from New Zealand, and straight away, as soon as we could, I visited New Zealand, a place I thought I'd never go and see. It's a place you hear about and read about, and see in pictures, and it was as beautiful as the pictures showed. The postcards of New Zealand. It's true, it is there, and so that was the first little penny. This is like 2002, 2003 when we came to visit, and then every winter we came, but every European winter we came back for a few weeks, and I think probably after a few years of that, I started to realise, and I was probably in my 50s by then. I'm thinking, Graham, what are you going to do when you retire? You're going to live in London for the next 30 years when cycling is just over the English Channel now. And I suddenly saw the opportunity of my retirement would be in New Zealand. And then we bought a house in New Zealand, still living in Europe. And then we got married in New Zealand in 2013. So it was an evolution of, like 3 or 4 steps of the way. And I said to my fiance in 2012, 5 more years. 5 more years. And it was actually January of 2012. So 5 years was until 2017. And I said, and I realized by then I wanted to stop or at least slow down. And I didn't want to do what happened with me in the UK was that I started following cycle races from the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And I went straight from being a photographer in a studio in London to being a wannabe cycling photographer. And I never saw England. I mean, I did see it. I did a thing called the Milk Race a couple of times and another race called the Kellogg's Tour of Britain. And but I didn't really see England. And it wasn't a tragedy, but I always thought in hindsight, what a shame. I went to the Lake District twice in my life, Scotland once. It's ridiculous. So once I discovered New Zealand, and also the fact I was beyond 50 years age, you start seeing the next phase of your life coming, and which I saw, but perhaps some people can't see. I thought, well, I can retire to New Zealand, but don't leave it too late. Don't wait until the traditional 65. And also, I was and still am a keen cyclist, and I like climb. I like tramping and hiking. So tons of walks to do. And so basically, I looked at everything that was going on, and decided to end it. Actually in 2016, but for contractual reasons, I had to do the Tour Down Under in 2017.
How come you didn't last till July and do one last tour and make it that, exact 40 years? Was that meaningful to you at all?
No, no, no. It was actually the opposite. I'd said to my wife, and only my wife, okay, I'll stop at 60, which was so my birthday's in March, so I had to stop before March of 2017. Otherwise, breaking my own promise.
Right,
Which,
right.
while I'm 60,
Yeah.
and because to some people 60 is early to stop, but I wanted to prove to them, but also to myself, that I can stop at 60, and I'm going to stop at 60, and I'm financially secure at 60, and I'm going to spend another phase of my life discovering New Zealand and Australia a little bit,
Yeah.
and that's what I did, and I did so I did 19 years of the Tour Down Under,
Uh-huh.
not 20, because I didn't want to do one more year.
Right.
I did 39 Tours de France, not 40, because I didn't want to run to July of
Yeah,
2017.
yeah.
And there were many instances like this. I think I saw the 100th Tour of Flanders, which was fine. There's some relative date with the Tour of Spain or Tour of Italy. I think the Tour of Italy, I may have done just 29 Tours of Italy, not 30. But I weighed everything up and I thought, no, I'm stopping when I said I would. And
You'd be going still if you were trying to make all those milestones. You'd always find another one, wouldn't you?
yeah, yeah. Mind you, I do wonder how I would have survived today with all this crazy world going on at the moment. How freelance photographer would survive because it'd be pretty tough. I mean, some magazines were closed already, but the fact is there's no races, so there's no money.
Well,
And
the
yeah,
fortunate part is that cycling is booming at the moment, and it is, magazines are closing, but I think that's the nature of the medium versus the industry and where they're putting their advertising dollars, and, um, I don't wanna jinx it because who knows how long it'll go for, right? But the cycling industry is doing well, and I haven't stopped paying any of our photographers on retainer. We're still using their archives, and I want them to be around when this all lifts, so I don't wanna stop paying them, even if it's a little bit of a dent, 'cause in reality, I know what it takes to do your job. I've caught a glimpse of it anyway and have an appreciation, and, um, what we pay them is not worth the work they do. It's what the market price is and the price they charge, and, yeah, but they have to make it work for themselves.
I meant more actually where the teams,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
um, you know, photographers, that's not their prime income, but
It's a
it's
big
their
part of it now though, isn't it?
big part.
Yeah.
And if there's no races,
Yeah.
so but
Well,
I'm sure most people will survive, but it's definitely a strange year for everybody.
I was talking to Christoph last night, and, he's saying, "What are you guys doing for the tour?" Because, he might work for 3 or 4 teams, but he either has to join one of them or stay far
Mm,
away from all of them. So,
yeah.
he's gonna
Oh,
be doing it old school, right, from the roadside.
yeah, yeah. I've got a few spies out there still, so I'm gonna try and find out exactly how it's all gonna work because, I've read the, restrictions for some of the media, the written media,
Yeah.
television as well, but, I just wonder how the photographers are going to, they'll have to keep their distance.
You keep
So,
your 400 mm lens on your
yeah.
it'll be backbreaking.
But, no, but I meant going back, it was not the magazines and
Oh,
websites
yeah.
that publish pictures, they'll always pay, so it's the sponsors that, don't, so.
Yeah. Uh, what do you miss and what don't you miss about the lifestyle, the job, photography, the racing?
Well, I've so many times I've asked myself that. If I'm awake at night time, I sort of think to myself, "What do I miss?" And I think the only thing I really miss is what I call the romance of travel. Does that make sense? So part of the traveling around Europe is not, so you're not staying in, the Hilton hotel every night. You're staying in some quaint little hotels with carpets on the wall, carpets for wallpaper, and I miss the sort of romance of, for example, finding a hotel at midnight, seeing if you manage to eat dinner that night, and just generally, as you know, any day in any given country is a it's not a challenge. There's logistics to be,
Adventure, isn't it?
and things go wrong and things go right, and there's some really bad things sometimes if you get your car broken into. But there's some great times when you land upon a restaurant that stayed open at midnight and they're serving you the best food in the whole of Italy. I miss a lot of that, and obviously, if I know the classics are in Belgium for that week, Paris-Roubaix, then there's a certain hotel where I used to stay at, and there's a restaurant we went to on the Monday night, and another one went to on the Wednesday night, and my little head is always thinking of those things. Which restaurant we'd be in tonight if we were still there, and also between races, which apartment we'd be staying in, which French village we'd be spending a few weeks in between the tour and the tour of Spain and things like this. But the sport I don't miss is on TV all the time in a normal year. Um, my colleagues I keep in touch with. Those that want to keep in touch with me, I do. Email. But generally, I think by the time I'd stopped, I'd had enough of the work. I couldn't. I don't think I could have. I couldn't have retired if I hadn't been satisfied. And so I know that I was very satisfied to stop because I couldn't. I don't think I could achieve much more.
No unfinished business in your career,
Not
right?
that I was in decline or, even maybe plateaued. I literally don't think I could have got much more out of my situation, for much longer, and, um, but that so the only thing I just describe it as nostalgia of traveling,
Yeah.
romance of travel, if you like.
Do you, still take an interest in photography in any way, or is that in the back of your mind?
I kept all my cameras, But I don't do more than take a few sunsets over the back of the house in the evening. Occasionally we go on trips in New Zealand, like I planned, and I take some of my little baby cameras with me. One of the things I've always disliked is carrying cameras around. So I bought a little handheld camera which does almost everything for me, and so no, not too much interest in photography. Not a lack of interest either. Just there's no, it's like I once did. I don't miss it. I still have to manage my archive, which takes yeah, quite a lot of work actually.
If you
Takes
were
up
to
my day.
guess, how many photos do you think you've taken?
It will be in the millions.
In the millions.
Yeah.
Wow.
Someone someone actually worked it out by the amount of amount of months of a season, and how many rolls of film I used in certain times of my career, and then digital and someone actually worked it out. It's many millions.
Jeez.
Yeah, and I've kept most of them, and they'll always need working on. A picture you uploaded to your database in 2005, which was perfectly edited and lighting and everything else. Yeah, with the progression of computers and quality, it's now it's like looking at a black and white movie.
Yeah.
It literally is, and you couldn't look at it. So you go back in and download it and treat it and everything else, and it goes back up as a brand new image. And I spend hours of a day doing that,
Jeez.
because you have to, otherwise people just won't bother looking.
Is there, and this is the hardest question ever, but is there just one standout? If I was to ask you what's your favorite picture, is there one that pops into your mind, or is that just an impossible thing to answer?
No, it's been asked that many times. I've had to, you know,
Okay, sorry.
think about it. No, it's really, it's the shot. Not everybody agrees with my choice, but it's Hino and Lamond at Alpe d'Huez in the '86 tour.
I know the
It's
one.
you know the one.
I know the one.
Um, it's because of many reasons: nostalgia, what was happening, the content, the actual technical side of the stuff. You know, it's a manual focus camera, things like this that probably only the photographer could appreciate. But it's and I speak to people and they say, "Nah, that's not your best shot." But I know it is because I know what went into it.
Tell me the story about that shot and what went into it and the circumstances of the race.
Well, it was the year when Greg LeMond was about to win his first Tour de France, '86, and Hino wouldn't really ever let LeMond take prominence in that last few days. He was still proudly riding along next to him or just half a wheel in front, just to say, "I'm Hino, and you may have won the Tour, but remember me and all this. You didn't do it without me." And the picture kind of sums it up. They come up to us side by side, round a bend, and Hino is definitely half a bike length ahead of LeMond because he's going through all the crowds in the last three hairpin bends, and he wants to be seen. And the picture breathes this because really the yellow jersey should be the one in front, but Greg kind of let Hino sort of just edge in front a little bit in the last few kilometers, and it kind of summed up the whole situation of Hino not giving way, but Greg having won the Tour nevertheless.
Right.
Technically, so I caught the moment, and also it's Alpe d'Huez without crowd barriers.
Yeah.
There's no cars in the background. There's a clear sky. You can see the mountains across the valley. You see all the fans. No, there's not a crowd barrier to be seen. And also, they're wearing clipless pedals and
Yeah.
no helmets, no glasses. It's just a dateless. No, it's a very dated picture, but it's from a certain time, which meant an awful lot.
It's
Uh,
iconic. It is.
but
Iconic. It's a period,
yeah,
battle, everything.
yeah. And then just for me as a photographer, it's a picture taken on a camera where you just press the button once
Right.
and that's it. And like you said earlier, if the eye is closed, so be it. But it wasn't.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and actually, without boasting, it's pin sharp.
Yep.
And then you wind on the film literally for the next cyclist coming up. So I'm a rare picture that some people laugh when I say it because they think a sprint shot is better or a crash shot or a scenery shot. But this is the one.
It means the most to you. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What advice would you have people who wanna follow their dream in, a profession such as yours? What would you tell them if I was to say that, "I wanna do what you've done?"
I would say do it.
Yeah?
Just don't do it by half. Just give everything you've got. Be realistic, but let the dream be your guide.
Yeah.
Just go for it. Don't think about doing it and 10 years later wish you had done it. It's too late. Just do it. The same as any other business.
Mm.
You think you're good enough at doing something, or like me, you love the sport and you're good at photography, have a go. It's not easy.
Mm.
Easiest thing is taking the picture.
Yeah.
The rest is very, very difficult. But it's I've discovered a great way of life. It's literally changed my life many, many times over. I tried and I succeeded, but it could have been very different.
I'm Wade Wallace, and thanks for listening to another episode of Overnight Success. If you have suggestions on a remarkable entrepreneurial story within the cycling industry, hit me up on our members Discord channel where I'd love to hear about it. Until next time, stay inspired and stay tuned for our next episode.